Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have an excellent and incredible episode for you guys, so hopefully you enjoy. And like a lot of our episodes, it's based on something that happened early last week. I don't know, this is like how the news. I may have to change the day on when we record Highly Respected because all the time we have big news events that happen after I record the episode on most Mondays, and then there's huge news events Monday night, Tuesday, and then I'm talking about it next week. I think most of the audience is fine with that, but it is funny how all the big breaking news for the last month or so has been happening late Monday and early Tuesday. Most of Trump's indictments have come out at that time, and some other news events have always happened at that time, and so we're always talking about that. And guess what we're going to be talking about today? Yes, we're going to be talking about Trump's latest indictment, this time coming from Georgia, Fulton County DA Fani Willis, DMV DA who has indicted him. Then Trump, I did everything right, and they indicted me again, as he would want to say. That's one of the best Trump quotes. It's like, I did everything right, and they indicted me. That was after, I forget if it was his first or second indictment that he did. I think it was after the documents where he delivered that epic quote, because he gave press conferences, but he hasn't been doing press conferences over the latest ones. And he's actually, he's supposed to do one in Georgia, but they canceled it. Probably a smart move, just to let the legal process and let his lawyers handle this stuff, rather than getting into the muck of that, especially with these DAs and judges who all hate Trump and are very liberal are trying to use his words against him. So, we love him to go on the attack in the public sphere, but it's probably better for his case not to do this. So here we're seeing another ridiculous indictment, and they're getting more ridiculous at the time. The Fulton County DA's office really showed their impeccability and their fineness to the letter of the law and being competent by leaking the indictment well before it was ready. In the morning of last Monday, they leaked it, and they posted it to the website. It was an error by one of the DMV clerks. Shockingly, this woman is a black female who was the one responsible. And then they pulled it, and then everyone's focusing on it. News reports are talking about it. Mainstream news media is talking about it. Trump campaign's talking about it. And of course, they just say, that's a lie. They making this up. This is fiction. How we did not post that report. And the type of people involved in this indictment will convince themselves that's a credible response, credible rebuttal to seeing the indictment. And then later on, it turned out that yes, that was the early version of the indictment. They released it later that night, possibly due to the error of posting it that morning, and it's all very clear that they're going to indict Trump. And then they went along with it. And then the clerk responsible apologized that I'm human. We all make mistakes. I was trying to hit save, and I hit send again. Really good preview of America's future there when you have, and they're like, I was trying my best to get it in on time, and I hit send instead of save. And well, great argument. And then they're like, you did a great job. There's a lot of this. And then the indictment itself was incredibly stupid because all the time it's like based on tweets. And it's, there's a time when it's like Trump is trying to commit a conspiracy to defraud voters or to overturn the election. And it's a tweet telling people to watch One American News. and it's all this other stuff. It's like, this is clearly that they're a threat to democracy because they didn't believe the election was free and fair. And it's just entirely, and then they throw in RICO charges. It's like, this was not a criminal, or the level of incompetence around both the Trump campaign and challenging the election and stuff. It's like, how the hell is this a RICO? I mean, they're just like trying to find anything they can to throw at the case. They're trying to be like, oh, this is an organized effort. And it's like the organized effort is like they're retweeting each other. I mean, that's literally what the indictment is saying. And then it's really both the last indictment from Jack Smith over the election, Stop the Steal, J6, and this are effectively criminalizing free speech. And there's a lot of lawyers who are indicted along with him. There's several lawyers. Some include the brilliant mind of Jenna Ellis, which we'll get to that in a moment about the Jenna Ellis reaction, how conservatives are reacting. But the argument is saying if that, you go up to a lawyer and you ask them for legal advice, that's now a criminal penalty. Because it's not like the lawyers are just saying like, well, here's how you can challenge it. There's some ways the Constitution grants or within American law grants that maybe you could do something about these election results. And they've done this time and time again. I mean, in the 2000 election, they all got high-powered legal teams to figure out ways of how to ensure that the election post or the results went their way after the election. And, challenging the results and seeing what's the best means for both. And both, Bush's team and Gore's team did that. Now those guys would be, charged with criminal offenses and RICO for this. And it's just so insane. And they're also indicting a lot of important officials in Georgia. The former party chairman, David Schaefer, is indicted along with it. Is that because he was one of the alternative electors, which they're alternate electors, which they've also charged all the people in Michigan, I think 16 people, with the crime of just signing up to be alternate electors. It's like, how is that a criminal offense? It doesn't clear. But even in the Michigan case, if they're found guilty on all these counts, a lot of those people may face 50 fucking years just for signing a piece of paper saying, I'm going to be a serve as alternate elector. Which it's not even like just on a basic level, on a human to human level, on a public level. It's like, how the hell is that a crime? How can like child rapists face like 2 years in jail, but you signing a piece of paper saying you're going to be an alternate elector results in 50 years in jail? Total madness, total anarcho-tyranny. And they're doing that to David Schaefer, and a lot of other important people in the party. And they're also considering, and I think there's also some other elected state officials who are there. One of the unindicted co-conspirators who was saved from a criminal offense simply because, and this is the lieutenant governor of the state, Burt Jones, who was a state senator at the time. He was almost indicted for having a tweet saying, I call for a special session to, oversee what we can do about the election results. And simply tweeting that made him a criminal, that he deserved an indictment. And the only reason he was not indicted is because Fani Willis, who was investigating all these people at that time, they've been investigating this, I think, since 2021, but at least throughout all of 2022. She held a fundraiser for his Democratic opponent last year in the lieutenant governor race. She held a fundraiser for him, and like the judge was like, "You're such an idiot." Like this clearly shows conflict of interest here. But it's once again DMV-ocracy, that they're just too stupid. They're like, these rules don't apply to me. And then at the same time, they imagine that they can be as wildly corrupt and wildly as incompetent as possible. But at the same time, they will charge people for sending a tweet telling them to watch OAN. This is a threat to democracy. And that's really what we're kind of facing here in the governance of a lot of these states where they take power. It's like, they could literally get away with murder. They can literally get away with like the massive amount of corruption. At the same time, they want to charge you, send you to jail for 50 years for a tweet. That's really what we're seeing. That's really what we're seeing with Fani Willis, is that there was a hilarious tweet from Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the curator of the 1619 Project, who was like thanking blacks, is like, once again, blacks are responsible for saving democracy, is that they're the true guardians of democracy, unlike anyone else, which, and it's all over Fani Willis, and all these mainstream outlets are having these fawning articles about him, as they really do believe, the Magic American thing. This is really when it comes out, especially with black women. The white liberals, especially white liberal women, have this really kind of religious devotion to black women. It's like, they're just so smart, they're so special, I love them. And it's how they react to certain black artists, Lizzo, Beyonce, all these types of things, is that they're like divine beings who are doing such good work and they have to worship them. And there's all these fawning pieces coming out. Nicole Hannah-Jones is furthering this along by saying that like blacks are the true guardians and advancers of democracy as opposed to whites. But that is like the core thesis of the 1619 Project, as I pointed out on Twitter, is like saying the purpose of it is to cast blacks as the central protagonists of American history, as the heroes of American history, and whites as the villains. Is that any type of good thing whites do, it's not really important, or it's due to questioning. Even someone like Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves and is responsible for making a more egalitarian vision of the Constitution and our, of our founding documents and what our purpose is as a nation, even he is cast as a villain or having villainous traits due to his support for colonization and his actions against Indians. And really the only true heroes, the true protagonists, the ones who made America America, are blacks rather than the Anglo-Protestant core. And that's what a lot of people are agreeing, and that's what she's furthering along with by seeing Fannie Willis as the great guardian of democracy, which she is not. I mean, this is just once again like corrupt black governance that's coming into play, and it's also especially true with some of the black leaders that they have, and most of them are becoming women. I mean, it's just really showing the matriarchal character of black communities. This was even apparent back in the 50s and 60s, is that a lot of black nationalists complained about how they were run by women and that it needs to be changed by men. But as it's only gotten worse since then. I mean, back then, even their leaders who were elected were all, men. Now today, it's most of their leaders, with the exceptions of people like Brandon Johnson, who's now the governor or mayor of Chicago, and some others. But even a lot of the guys that they elect are kind of down low. Guys like Gillum, now coming out with the news, Obama, experimented with homosexuality in college. There's that elements, but most of their leaders now are women, and it can be, someone like Muriel Bowser, who is the mayor of Washington, D.C., and some of the mayors that they are electing are these kind of incompetent people who that they're more competent than others, and they're trying to please like the powers that are in their cities. And a lot of them, Atlanta mayors, are like that, like Keisha Bottoms, who is no longer the mayor of Atlanta, and she was considered a top choice to be Biden's VP. They're less competent technocrats who are trying to please like business and have this juggling act. Don't really do a good job of it. Like Muriel Bowser is trying to push back against the soft on crime policies pushed by a lot of her community and a lot of the other leaders in DC, but she can't really resist it. She can only veto and beg Congress to not approve of these measures. But they don't have that. Then there are the people like Maxine Waters, Sheila Jackson Lee, and one of my favorite is Frederica Wilson from South Florida. These are complete Looney Tunes. There's no degree of competence at all. There's also moral righteousness to them, even though they're all wildly corrupt and don't practice at all good governance or any commitment to the Anglo norms of how government should be had. It's like, total, like they're making millions off of their position. And they all they're all trying to criminalize free speech. Maxine Waters had pushed a lot of things when she was popular in the Trump era. Sheila Jackson Lee tried to criminalize racist thoughts. She tried to have a hate speech bill. And then she's like, they lied about this. This ain't a hate speech bill. This is a protect people bill. And then Frederica Wilson was one of my favorites, is that this is still during the Trump era. I think this is 2019 or 2020. And she's like, we need to arrest people who criticize our elected officials. That's just un-American. That's bad. We need to arrest these people. I get criticized all the time. These people need to face the law. And it's like, what? They have no concept of like what free speech means. But at the same time, they're like, I should not be charged for granting millions of dollars in contracts to people who are going to enrich me and giving my whole family jobs that they don't deserve. That's not criminal, but, criticizing me on Twitter, that deserves the full brunt of the law. So it's a very, very much at the peak of anarcho-tyranny, is that they don't want to do anything about real crime or their corruption, but they do want to punish people who attack them, who criticize their idiotic actions on Twitter. And so you have that dynamic working there. But then you have it with Fannie Willis. It's hard to. I don't think she's as as ridiculous as Frederica Wilson and Sheila Jackson Lee and Waters, but she's close to it, and definitely her office is that, and it's you really can't trust this indictment due to that. But they're able, even if the indictment is stupid, and even if they do have a chance of beating it in court, I think actually out of all the cases that Trump has before him, this probably has the best opportunity for him to just beat it in court. One is that there's the chance that they could move it to a federal court, which would have a bigger jury pool, a lot more Trump voters being put in that jury pool, and that would help him out a lot. The case is incredibly flimsy. It's basically he has the flimsy case that Jack Smith has filed against him in D.C. court. It's now in Georgia where there's a lot more normal people. There's a lot better chance of Trump supporters being there. Now it's stuck in Fulton County. Probably not good, but I think there's a very good chance he can get this sent to federal court, where federal court hears it, and he's had a much wider jury pool where he could pull in a lot of his supporters. And unlike in the documents case where he is technically guilty on the letter of it, or I don't want to say he's technically guilty. I think if they look at the evidence there, it's like, okay, he did do this stuff, but at the same time, it's really something beyond the law. It's like, we don't prosecute any senior officials for this. Look at Hillary, look at Biden, look at Pence. We do this all the time. Why is Trump the only one being indicted for this versus Hillary, Biden, and Pence? Obviously, the answer is political. But on the, what's presented, and most lawyers say this is like, it's a, out of all the indictments, it's the most solid case they have. At the same time, there's the bigger issue of just saying we don't prosecute senior officials for this, and there's many examples of that. So it's still a political prosecution. He shouldn't have been charged with it, but they could convince a jury that he is guilty. Whatever. The other cases are all just total bullshit, and they're banking on the district that they're filing them in and the local jury pool to be so anti-Trump that they'll do that. Stormy Daniels, obviously, case. Even liberal lawyers are saying this is an idiotic case, that this is not a real crime. This is just a campaign violation that you pay a minor fine for at most, and then they're elevating it to a serious felony, and they're just saying that that's stupid, that's idiotic. The only reason that they're, filing this case is because they believe a Manhattan jury will convict Trump no matter what they charge him with. Same with D.C., not as much criticism of that as there is a Stormy Daniels, at least from liberals. Once again, a flimsy case that if it was held in any other jurisdiction besides D.C. or New York, it would be thrown out, or it would not be, a judge, especially a Trump appointee, would likely throw it out with extreme prejudice. And even if it went to court, a jury would likely find Trump not guilty. And so the one thing that he has going with him in Georgia is there's a strong chance he can get, change of venue and change of who's hearing the case. And he, if it goes to trial, I would say there's at least a 50% chance he's found not guilty, depending on the setting. If it's stuck in Fulton County, not in a federal court, maybe it's not 50%. If it's in a federal court, I give him over 50% of being exonerated in that court. And there's even a possibility that a judge would throw out the case if it was taken to a federal court. So there is that hope and those things to keep in mind. The other good news is that the indictments really are increasing Trump support. A new poll just came out over the weekend. Well, as we all know from DeSantis supporters, every poll since February has been fake, and they've all been paid for by the Trump campaign. Even though they complain the Trump campaign is broke and is spending all its money on legal fees, they're apparently buying up every mainstream reporter who writes an article about the failing DeSantis campaign. Or on all these polling firms that show that Trump has a clear lead in the race. But it shows that he's finally getting into the low 60s in support. And a lot of other polls are showing him in the high 50s of the support. And then DeSantis is declining below 15% in a lot of these polls. The one that showed him Trump with 62% had DeSantis at 16%. But DeSantis' support is declining and Trump's is increasing with the convictions. So there's greater rallying support around him. At the same time, there are downsides to these convictions. I don't like everyone saying like, oh, this is an attempt to make sure he wins a nomination. And, that. No, it's not. It's to ensure that he never becomes president again. And really, the convictions are trying to ensure that all the finances for the Republican Party and Trump stay tied up in these legal battles. And everyone's complaining about it. It's like, look, they're like, oh, I can't believe all this money is being spent on his legal defense. To be honest, most Republicans, if you ask Republican voters and ask them, it's like, hey, do you want a lot of money to be spent on a stupid ad firm that pays for these idiotic memes, online right memes, and pays off influencers to tweet nonstop about Trump as like a jilted, like Trump broke their heart and broke up with them? Or would you rather have that money be used to defend Trump against these persecutions by the state? And I think they would rather choose that most of the money that is wasted in campaigns on, stupid consultants that are idiots and tell them the wrong advice, or helping with Trump with his legal fees, they'd be fine with that. But it is a ton of money, and it's a lot of that money is being tied up in this, and it's hard for them to get out of that predicament. Another thing to keep in mind is that these indictments, I always thought that the indictments would maybe convince Trump to get out of the race or his legal problems would outweigh him. But I actually think the legal indictments, due to their massive cost, is to ensure that Trump stays in the race because, and people like saying like, oh, Trump can afford his own legal fees. I mean, this is like tens of millions of dollars. This is a lot of money for his legal defense. And he really is depending on the campaign to ensure that he maintains legal defense. I mean, Trump lost a lot of money by being president. Everyone said that like he was becoming president to enrich himself. It's like, no, he lost a lot of money. He lost a ton of his reputation and his ability to be a brand name and to make even more money by being president. And he doesn't quite have, and he has so many legal cases against him. He still has these lawsuit from the woman who claims he raped him. He still has those legal problems. He's got 4 different indictments he's got to worry about and pay, lawyers, absolute monster fees for, and all this stuff. And he is actually, it's not so much that he's being a cheapskate. It's like he is dependent on this stuff to help him with his legal defense. And as like and he is being prosecuted not just as an individual, but as a representative of a symbol of the middle America, of the historic American people that the government wants to, push down and suppress and to tell them to know their place and to stop rebelling. And they're doing this in order to blackpill and demoralize that base. And it's not just simply that he's a criminal or some sort. They're doing this as a flex of power against these people they perceive as their political enemies. And so he's even more dependent on that campaign to help him out in his many legal battles. And if he just said he dropped out, where is he going? He's going to have he's going to have a lot more trouble obtaining legal fees. And now I can already hear the DeSantis people like, this is why DeSantis should be our nominee. It's like he would really win over the Trump base. It's like, DeSantis is not offering a pardon. He's not doing anything to win over Trump voters. And he's like even used the listless vessels for applying to Trump people, even though he had his own reasons of like they're expecting us to be listless vessels and support Trump. He used it in his own way as like expecting like candidates to be for supporting for Trump, but it's obviously easily interpreted to mean all Trump supporters. And it's like you have to be smart as a politician of how it's going to be interpreted. And everyone always complains like this is not how it's supposed to be interpreted. But that's how it is. And as a politician, you're supposed to be smart enough to realize that because DeSantis is getting in trouble over saying listless vessels. But now he's not. But his like whole team, on Twitter is spinning 24/7 and spin. Every poll's fake. He's just around the corner from having a huge victory. He's going to have a massive win at the debates despite being horrible in debates. And just like everything's going hunky-dory, he's actually going to win in a landslide. So, I mean, I don't know why they complain, but they're in a permanent state of spin. And everything he does seems to be trying to appeal to his online surrogates rather than to appeal to ordinary Republican voters. But I mean, even if, like, first off, it's never going to happen. It's like the only way that Trump would even consider dropping out of the race, which I think is becoming less and less likely over time, is if, they promise to grant him a pardon and, Republican functionary, or whatever the Republican Party promised to help him out with his legal fees and that of his allies. And now with the Georgia indictment, they're going to be helping out a lot of these people who are indicted along with him. That's even a lot more money. And I know the Georgia Republican Party is trying to pitch in, but that's a lot of money that's going to have to spend for this. And Democrats and the left realize why they're pushing these indictments and why they're trying to create as wide a net as possible is because they're trying to drain the Republicans of financial resources. And a lot of people are like, well, it's time to cut our losses and only help out Jenna Ellis in her legal battle because Jenna Ellis is no longer is a DeSantis surrogate now. And that's the only person we should support, who the brilliant legal mind of Jenna Ellis. But it's gonna really demoralize your supporters and your base if you're just allowing all these people to go to jail and get hit with like massive life charges, and they're not even able to defend themselves. And somehow they're going to rally to DeSantis over his call to fire Chris Wray, but not to pardon Trump. It's like Chris Wray is not involved in this stuff. It's the DOJ. It's Fani Willis. It's all these people, and it's all primarily directed against Trump, like no one else. And they still won't. They still won't do that. Only Vivek is promising that pardon. And that's the only person that probably Trump would, even in theory, drop out and endorse. But I think it's becoming less likely over time due to some of the reasons for staying in the race. And he also realizes that he has a nomination. Again, and it's not just like he needs the money to support himself. He also believes the only way he can avoid prison is by winning the White House. And that in mind, he's convinced that it's not a bad theory. He's probably right in a lot of ways. It's the only way you can do this. So, and he feels that he's the best position to win the White House versus anyone else. And that's why he would stay in the race. So I'm becoming a lot more skeptical that he will ever drop out. I think the only thing that might change if he gets convicted. But he has to be convicted like months before the convention. And the primary could be over, but it's before the convention, and maybe he's like, and there's like an appeal denied. Maybe the Supreme Court denies his appeal, and he's like, absolutely, this conviction is sticking. And he may realize like, I won't be able to run for office. I may have to go with someone else to give me a federal pardon. So he can't get a pardon here in the Georgia case. Georgia pardon rules are pretty ridiculous. The governor can't directly pardon anyone. It's a pardon board, and they could only grant a pardon after you've served your sentence. So that's not really going to help Trump. There's ways they could change that, but it takes it'd take like 2/3 of the Senate legislature, and I don't think Republicans, they don't have 2/3. I think in the state Senate. So I don't think they're going to convince enough Democrats to support this. And also, they do have the means to remove DAs if they are abusing their power, but it appears outside of one state senator, there's not a massive push to do this because it appears the Georgia state GOP, even though the lieutenant governor may be indicted, by over a tweet by one of their political opponents, by one of the most progressive prosecutors in the country, someone backed by George Soros, totally, soft on crime, pushing everything Republicans say they're opposed, and they're going to step aside because they want these prosecutions to take out Trump. Is that Republicans realize the only way they can beat Trump is through the criminal justice system. They know they can't beat him direct on. They know that, it's very clear that they can't take him direct on right now, is that his numbers keep going up. He still has the fierce loyalty of the base. They can't get rid of him on their own. So they're hoping that their political enemies take him out, that he gets convicted, and that they can be done with Trump and Trumpism for forever. And Brian Kemp, A ton of these DeSantis supporters always love. It's not just DeSantis supporters, but like conservatives in general love Brian Kemp because he's like anti-Trump and he wins. There's not really anything particularly conservative he does. Besides, they did do some election reform laws to make it better for Republicans to win the state, but obviously that didn't help Herschel Walker in 2022. I think Walker had other issues though. He's still he's not going to come to Trump's aid. Even if he had direct pardon power, he wouldn't pardon Trump. That's like the fact. He wouldn't pardon Trump. And I do find it concerning how conservatives are so affected by Trump derangement syndrome that they really are sounding like 2016 all over again. Is that all they have is Twitter, and every day on Twitter they think they vanquished Trump. It's just petty. It's just petty tweets. It's passive aggressive stuff. It's the same damn people who were tweeting all the time about how much they hate Trump in 2016, and now they're back again 7 years later to do the same shit now and pretending that Trump is the most evil force, and they're just hating on their base. They're hating on their supporters. But the real difference here is that they realize Trump is going to be the nominee. So there's now this sense of nihilism in it. It's a sense of fatalism that's taking over them, that there's nothing they can control, and it's just lashing out. It's impotent lashing out at the way the world works, at the way America works, and at their Republican base, that they know they can't convince them to vote for autistic Ron, to robot Ron to be the candidate. And that's just the nature of the thing. And even with their great hope is that all the other candidates drop out and rally behind Ron. None of the other candidates are going to do that because they're all catching up on Ron. Even, Pence, Christie, Vivek, obviously. Vivek would never drop out because he knows his big part is, appealing to Trump. He would not want to drop out to help out DeSantis. And, DeSantis can't convince these people to drop out. He's like a terrible candidate. He's not winning over people, and his numbers keep declining. And there's like no selling point for DeSantis as the person everyone needs to rally behind. So that's just never going to happen. And that's like their whole basis for victory now, is that everyone suddenly, when DeSantis's poll numbers continue to slip and decline, and he continues to show himself as a weak candidate who is not ready for the national stage and would probably not win a presidential race, even eliminating the whole Trump and the legal problems and all that, he would still not win a presidential race based solely on his personality and what he was running on. That somehow this is going to convince all the other candidates to drop out, and this would be enough to upset Trump, who is heading to the low 60s in polling. And it's like, even if they all dropped out, Trump's numbers would go up to the mid 60s. And so he would still lose. So the only thing they have is to get Trump out of the race. Because as long as Trump's in the race, he is the nominee. There is a chance that maybe Republican voters move on from Trump if he gets convicted. But his conviction is likely not to happen. Even if he is convicted, it's likely not going to happen before the primaries start. It could happen in the middle of the primaries. And also, I think that a trial could outrage Republicans so much that they rally to him, and they're even more steadfast in their support of Trump. And even if they're convicted, they're so angry that they vote for him at the ballot box. So this is, it's a bet that it's not sure, but it's literally the only thing they have. And that's why Republicans are getting out of the way of these indictments. And they're also coming to support these indictments, is that DeSantis supporters on Twitter, they've changed. They were first criticizing the Stormy Daniels one. Then they were critical of the documents one. They were never saying oh, this is it. But then it's begun to change. Like with the new indictment, or with the Jack Smith challenging election indictment, J6 indictment, they began to, defend it and saying Trump lied to you about the stolen election. You have to abandon him now. This is there's a real clear-cut case here. And even though the cases are getting flimsier as they go along, the DeSantis supporters are becoming more defending of him because they know that these are the way to take Trump out. And now with the Georgia one, which is cast a huge net over a ton of Republicans, it's even includes a DeSantis supporter, Jen Ellis, and they're now strongly defending it. They're like, this is a clear-cut case. It's trying to drop Trump. Trump is a liar. He is responsible for this. Thank you, Fani Willis. And they're turning into Fani Willis's biggest fan base here over this because they think that Fani Willis can take out Trump. And they will rally behind Jenna Ellis, who's the only innocent victim here. But that's what conservatives are doing. And I'm starting to see there is a worrying sign of this, of how conservatives are reacting to these cases, because this is the type of pressure that has happened on federal judges. If all conservative media is like saying this is bullshit, these charges should be thrown out, federal judges read that stuff. They read National Review, they read Wall Street Journal, they read New York Post, and if they're seeing editorials saying this is complete bunk, this is an insult to our American justice system, they're like, oh, I see that there's a lot of people that I respect who are telling me that I should intervene here and that this is a ridiculous case. But if they're seeing really wimpy criticisms of it and half-hearted criticisms of it, and there's a underlying assumption that we should let these charges stand because Trump is so bad, which both the Wall Street Journal editorial board, National Review editorial board had that in their statements on the Trump indictment, the latest Trump indictment. And it's even seeing in the New York Post opinion section, there were people supporting it. I think you aren't going to have that type of pressure on the Supreme Court or federal judges to, throw out the charges. I used to have this theory that Trump, and I've promoted in this previous podcast, is that Trump could be helped by the Supreme Court intervening in the case prior to judgment, prior to any conviction, or even prior to maybe even the jury trial starting, and throwing out the case. But I'm more skeptical about it based on the reactions, is that one, the entire liberal media, unlike with Stormy Daniels, is saying that this is an airtight case, this is an important case, and even the type of conservative legal analysts who criticize it, they couch it, and they're very mealy-mouthed about it and not very forceful. And this has an impact on those. Alito and Thomas would have obviously thrown it out, but, there's 4 other justices they have to worry about. And that type of pressure campaign that they need to hear, or where they're reading in Wall Street Journal about what the case is, and if the Wall Street Journal is like, oh, it has a point here, then Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Roberts are going to be inclined to not want to intervene because they see that even their news outlet that they turn to the most to learn about the news and learn about what in the world is, on the fence about the indictment, then that shows that they want to be on the fence about the indictment and they don't want to get involved. And so I'm less inclined to think that they'll intervene prior to judgment. I think Trump's best scenario for all these cases is to delay them until after the election. As long as he is not convicted prior to the election, his chances are as good as they were in 2020 and 2016. And everyone said that he had no chance of winning in both times. And a lot of people say he won in 2020. But even if you said even if you're like a liberal who believes that it's a totally free and fair election, he's only 30,000 votes from an outright victory in 2020. And in 2016, nobody predicted he would win, and he won. And so even liberals who are thinking that he's going to get convicted and that this is going to be, that they're going to win, they're like, it's likely only going to be a few thousand votes that would secure Democrats the victory in 2024. And that's why they're very worried about Trump. And they do know, and also Democrats are depending on a conviction too. Trump would still have a chance of winning. You can't really count him out at any time. Anytime people count him out, he comes roaring back. And there's been several times that people are like, "This is the end of Trump." J6, like most recent examples, J6. Everyone's like, "He's done. There's no way he can run again." He's running again, and has 60% support among the Republican field, and he's doing very well in national polls, which he was never doing in national polls, like head-to-head national polls against Democratic candidates at any point in his time when he's running for president. Even back in 2016 and even in 2020, he was always losing those head-to-head polls by a lot. But there's a lot of head-to-head polls showing him extremely close within the margin of error or with him ahead. And liberals are very worried about that. And so even if he's convicted, Trump is like Jason Voorhees or like a slasher villain. It's like, every time you're like, okay, we burned him alive, we sawed off his head, there's no way he can come back for a sequel. Sure enough, he comes back for a sequel, bigger and stronger and more deadly than ever. He is the he is the political equivalent to Jason Voorhees. Like, there's no way they could get rid of Jason Voorhees in the Friday 13th movies. They can't get rid of Jason. They can't get rid of Trump. So maybe they think like, oh, he's convicted. And then they see his poll numbers and it doesn't make much of a difference. I would say, like, rational side of me, I would say it would likely hurt him enough that it would be much tougher for him to win. I do think it would be much tougher for him to win with a conviction. Not impossible, but much tougher. But if he delays all these trials, which is a very good chance that he does, which he can do, and that they're all pushed forward or pushed back beyond the 2024 election, he still has as good of a shot as ever running against president. I mean, he's literally running against a walking corpse and Biden, who has nothing to campaign on, and that's it. But the thing you have to realize, even if you hate Trump and you think that there's bad things about Trump, is that you have to. This is like literally going to be the only chance to win, the only possible nominee, that can unite the base and carry that base forward and energize them for turnout. Because if Trump is not the nominee, it's likely that a significant number of the Republican base, probably won't be the majority, but it'll be enough to impact the presidential election. They will just not show up because they'll be so demoralized. They will be blackpilled. They're like, we wanted Trump, and now you're offering us Robot Ron or somebody else. And, Trump doesn't even endorse that person, and Trump is telling us to stay home, or Trump is just, in jail or something. And we're just not going to show up because we think that politics is all fake and we wanted Trump and they denied us who we wanted. And they're not going to show up. So you really are stuck with Trump. The only alternative that could possibly happen that maybe Republicans could win is if Trump endorses VVAC and is totally supportive of VVAC, and VVAC carries along, is able to get a lot of that base to still turn out for him because he's getting the Trump support. He's given the full Trump support and full Trump endorsement. Maybe that could work. But any other candidate, if it's not Trump, most likely they would lose. And they'd still have to deal with the Trump factor. And then they would have to deal with the factor of winning over Trump voters. And it's likely to prove to be a predicament that they can't overcome. So those are the things on the Georgia indictment. Oh, everyone's going to complain that these are blackpilled, and I know the live stream is just going to be bitching the whole time about these things. But we're not finished yet. We've still got more stuff for you to get mad about. So sit back down, live stream. You've got to be prepared to complain even more. So on this topic of, what happens with Trump if he gets convicted, I think it's worth talking about what happens with the future of the right. And we're already seeing it with two events that are happening. I talked about this last week, the Oliver Anthony song, and then the conservative consumer demographic. I wrote an article about that. And, the Bud Light boycotts and how this is taken on a mind of its own. Like, the base of that comes from the MAGA movement, but it's not led by Trump. Like, Trump is no longer, he's still the figurehead and representative of the movement, but he's not quite, he's still sort of seen as the leader, but they aren't led by him, as that they have a mind of their own. And with this movement, it is really like leaderless because, Trump is doing his own thing, is there. They still see him as a leader, but they're not really being led by him, or he's not choosing to lead them. And then Tucker's been taken off the air, Fox News, and his influence has been greatly diminished. He still has a degree of influence, but no longer to where, if you went back to March, you would have said the two most influential leaders on the right are Trump and Tucker, and that's where everyone gets their cues from. You no longer say Tucker, you'd still say Trump, but he doesn't wield quite the type of leadership influence that he did when he was president and in the late 2010s. So it's really developing something on its own, like Oliver Anthony. That's like something completely different from Trump. Same with like Bud Light and Target and and like Sound of Freedom. Like, these are all Trump-free moments and events, and it has a relationship to it, but it is showing that this conservative base has very Trumpian elements, and you can see that in Forgiato Blow and stuff, and it has a very much of the carnival aspects around Trump, but it's without Trump as a leader, and it's without Trumpism as its policies. It's really just this celebration of truly it is a multiracial working class elements, and it has a lot of resentment towards bourgeois Americans. And there's some sometimes I like the content, but at other times it is a you can almost see this as insane clown party elements with it. Insane clown posse. People, this is not a unique term. I remember them always saying insane clown party about Trump, when he was running for president the first time. They were always like, this is the insane clown party. And they would always talk about that as like jokes, but there are elements of the insane clown posse that are found within the GOP. It's like, one, it's very, there's a multiracial element to it, or it's like whites adopting some of Wiggerisms. The insane clown posse do claim to be devout Christians, but of a very unorthodox brand of Christianity, where they're allowed to use vulgarity and a lot of other and celebrate violence, but they do come around to being Christians. They're very much obsessed with satanic pedophiles. They have a lot of songs about violence towards them. That's very much sound in the right. They're very anti-science, as the song "Miracles" that they did in 2010 that came out. If a lot of you guys are not millennials and you may not remember this, but there was a viral hit back then. And this is before like Twitter was really that popular. And YouTube was just starting to kick off. So this was like a YouTube phenomenon. As they released this music video, it's like a horrible music video for this song called Miracles. As basically them like saying like magnets, how do they work? Like, fuck scientists. I'm tired of you make confusing my mind. And if you listen to Miracles today, it really is like the anthem of the insane clown party of what they want to be about and promote. It's like rap music. It's they're not figuring out how the world works, and then they're believing it's all conspiracy theories. It's very much kind of like the worst aspects of that you're seeing. Now, going to the Oliver Anthony song, is that there's now been two trends of this. Is like, one, everyone's conservatives are soy jacking over blacks discovering the song and vibing with it. There was a video that went viral showing all these reactions towards it, and most of the YouTubers are blacks. And there's a whole, everyone who's listening to this knows this, but there's like a whole genre on YouTube of reaction videos. I absolutely hate that. Once, because a lot of my music is like the reaction videos. It's like, blacks listen to Morbid Angel or blacks listen to Burzum and they react. They're like, oh, hell no. Why is this guy screaming at me? And I find it embarrassing. I cringe when I see it. And I do not want to hear my music with, inner city dialogue, over it. I don't want the inner city commentary underneath, a Dark Throne song or whatever. And so I don't want to hear that. But people, for whatever reason, love it. And there's also a lot of reaction to country music videos. And all these guys, there's like this video of like these black guys, hell yeah, I like that. Oh shit, that's a good line. And they're all vibing along with it. And everyone retweeted is like, and one of the guys who retweeted it was Jason Howerton, who's been involved in promoting the Oliver Anthony song to conservatives and is doing work with Oliver Anthony now. And he tweeted this, and this is a variant of everyone who's doing this to reaction videos. The feeling in the country right now isn't right or left. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's not white or black. The rich men in north of Richmond are terrified of the day when we figure that out. And like Howerton's like a basic bitch conservative. It's like, what? We're all going to unite around tax cuts and deregulation? Yeah, that's really what the elites are terrified of. And it's very much into this fantasy they want to have of inner city blacks and whites uniting and country boy whites uniting against the elites to do something. They haven't quite figured out what they're uniting over or what they're about, but they're uniting over something. I guess they're uniting to ensure that Insane Clown Posse gets on the radio or something. But that's like a big part of the appeal of Insane Clown Posse is it's a uniting inner city blacks with, whites that some people would refer to as white trash together and putting them together to drink Faygo or something. I guess that's what the goal of that is. But that's really what they want. And it's such a cringe thing because anything that would unite inner city blacks with hillbillies or something would be terrible. It'd be something we would oppose. And everyone's like, we want this populist vision. It's like, that's not our populist vision, okay? Our populist vision is not in uniting, illegal immigrants and inner city blacks and hillbillies together for something of this. And it's a very Marxist type vision, but it's now articulated by these conservatives that are hostile to Marxism and hostile to socialism. It's like Jason Howard and these guys absolutely don't want socialism, but then they think like, oh, everyone's uniting for what? Like even Richmond, north of Richmond, it's song, any type of the direct political lines is just criticism of welfare cheats, keyed, and then the belief that all these elites are pedophiles, which is, all these things are very right-wing things. It's not very, there's not a quite of an economic populist message there, but they want to believe it's an economic populist message there. And if the right became united around it, it would just be, a stupid leftist party. It'd be like what Sohrab Ahmari and these guys are articulating, where they're now coming out as progressive Democrats, and they're complaining about immigration restriction, they're complaining about people owning guns, and they're complaining about people being racist or something, and complaining about systemic racism and policing. And that's absolutely not what we're part about. And I'm always, all the time people soy jack over this idea of blacks and whites coming together against the elites. It's like, this is what they fear. It's like, what are they coming together at? We saw that happen in 2020 with the BLM riots. It's because it wasn't quite the hillbillies, but it was. Well, there were some hillbillies because there's some of these doofus libertarians were out there, like the guy who was shot by Daniel Perry, not Daniel Penny, Daniel Perry, very similar name, who was the Army sergeant who shot the Antifa checkpoint guard in Austin, Texas. The guy he shot was a goofball libertarian, and all these Boogaloo boys came out in favor of the BLM guys and the riots and stuff. And there's, of course, all the white Antifa. And you saw black and whites coming together to cause chaos for George Floyd. That was like, really, it is. Like, you really absolutely don't want that. And I hate when the right is always obsessed over it. It's like, we come together to support the further decline of our country and the further advancement of non-white interest and non-white control of the country, or non-white favorability in the country. That's not what we're about at all. And I don't even think that's what Oliver Anthony's song is about, but people are now getting along with getting into this idea. And there was another horrible remix where guys further got this as like, this is the path to destroying the elites. And there was a rap remix of the song, which is a white guy in a field, in a farm field, who's doing it. And it was so awful. I mean, like, the lines of it are more explicitly political coming from the rap, but it's like a remix. And all these conservatives like, this is awesome. I love this. And a lot of right wingers were pointing out like how it's not in these terms, but it is really just showing the insane clown party element. It's like, it's a celebration of horrible aesthetics, horrible quality, of this type of white trashification of whites and this wiggerification of whites. And we're all kind of united in this resentment towards something of an elite that they can't really articulate what it is about. And it's just uniting of, it's becoming essentially more like a juggalo gathering than an actual political movement that middle-class whites would want to be a part of. It's just like this celebration of trash culture, and that's what it becomes into this. And the Oliver Anthony song itself, as I always said, was fine, and I don't find it offensive. It's not really what I want to personally listen to, but it's like a decent song. If you like country music, if you like authentic country music, people are going to like it. And, if it came on, there's like a cringe aspect now because everyone's playing it and stuff, but if, without that aspect, I would hear it. It's like, oh, it's a fine song. But then they add the rap stuff, and it's just like horrible, horrible, horrible taste. And conservatives like these guys online, the conservative consumer base, consumer demographic, loves it. They absolutely go ape shit over it. And it does show like all these guys who talk about right-wing art, and it's like avant-garde standards and advancement. And what really they want is a hip-hop tune about how, Klaus Schwab started the Maui wildfires, which goes in another thing that I've shown that is a problem with right. Otherwise, you do have to be understanding that like not everyone's going to be an elitist aristocrat who's sitting around listening to Wagner and is well read. It's like we're going to have people who are ones that a lot of the left would call white trash and are working class whites, and they have different standards than us. But that's fine, and you incorporate them as long as they're focused on the important issues. It's okay. If there was a hip hop song about like deporting every illegal, I would say that's keyed, okay? But that's not what's happening, unfortunately. And it also becomes that they're ignoring identity issues to go on with the entertainment conspiracy theory stuff. And we're seeing this in the Maui wildfires. The Maui wildfires, there is clear evidence that this is started by having an idiotic government run by these native Hawaiians who are fully enmeshed in all this left-wing wokeness and critical race theory stuff. And they saw one of these officials who was like, oh, water is sacred. We can't release it. It's an equity matter. And we want to have a spiritual understanding of water and have like more diversity in this stuff. And these are like the idiots who are running their disaster response. And it's all run by these corrupt minority officials who care more about like advancing these guys who think that we shouldn't use water to contain fires because it's sacred. It's a sacred native Hawaiian thing. And like these people just like have no competence, and they're guided by these idiotic critical race theory and anti-white ideas that they just want to overturn science and Western civilization and have their own little land. Because a thing you got to realize is like the native Hawaiians absolutely hate whites. Like I've been to Hawaii 3 times in my life, and it's one of the few areas I've ever been to where the locals see you and they really resent you. You really feel that hatred from them. You don't quite feel it, walking around blacks. Well, it's around blacks. It's a different thing. It's more like I'm gonna get robbed. Depending on if it's like in a ghetto or something, you might be like might not be the most safe area. But they really resent you. They really have a rudeness about you when even if you're at a cash register, they really don't want you there. They always have these symbols of like, we're going to take this land back. It's ours. And there was even that example of these Hawaiian guys who beat the shit out of this white guy who moved into their neighborhood, and they got federal hate crime charges over it. And it was simply they beat the shit out of him because he was white. They didn't want a white guy there moving into their neighborhood. And so they really, really hate whites, even though the fact that the only reason this state has any wealth is due to whites and white tourists, but they really hate them. And they're running this place. And you can really see it's like this, it's totally Democratic controlled, totally, corrupt and just like incompetent people running. And it's really the Maui wildfires and how devastating it is really a representation of what America's future is if you allow these insidious ideas to take root, if you allow racial quotas to take hold, and if you allow that these BIPOC with long-standing anti-white sentiments and a lot of ridiculous ideas about indigenous science take over and are in control of disaster response and control of the police and fire department. What happens? It is a dark vision of majority minority America. That is the real point of the Maui wildfires. But instead, the right isn't focusing on this. Instead, the right is focusing on space lasers and the Oprah Winfrey, and I guess Klaus Schwab is probably involved. They destroyed the whole island, even though it's all full of Democrats. They want to destroy, but apparently now the Maui wildfire people are all hardcore Trump supporters and conservatives, and they wiped it out just to have a real estate deal. And this is why they use their space lasers for this. So all the wildfire stuff, everyone has to have a conspiracy theory for this stuff because the right is incapable of seeing an event and just realizing like, oh, there's probably a normal, rational explanation for this. Like incompetent people running this, racial quotas, or like or just democratic control where they advance like idiotic environmental policies. There's a lot of rational explanations. But every wildfire that now happens, there's some deep conspiracy theory. It's like what happened with the Canada wildfires, is that the entire right believed that there was some deep conspiracy theory here and that they were trying to kill everyone in America with these wildfires. When the wildfires most impacted the liberal elites on the coastline, the Acela corridor, the areas where it had the worst air quality and stuff was like New York, Philadelphia, Boston was having terrible air quality, Washington, D.C., and it's like they're trying to kill off middle Americans. And it's like the people that are being most impacted are all the urbanite bugmen you hate. It's like, why are they starting these wildfires to kill themselves? I don't understand this. It even happened even with the East Palestine, or it's East Palestine, that's how they pronounce it. You know, the terrible accident, they're doing this to kill off middle Americans from trying to rise up and resist. And it's like, I don't think they have to worry about that because, you know, Trump got indicted and there were no protests. So I don't think they have to worry about a middle American revolt anytime soon. But people just get into these conspiracy theories and stuff because it's more entertaining, and it's really what they want to hear. They want to hear entertainment. They don't really want to hear the dark, grim nature of these events that are staring them right in front of their eyes. And there's no conspiracy theory about these officials involved. They're openly saying this stuff. They're openly tweeting this stuff. They have that background, and you could see that incompetent response there. And it's just what happens it's what America's future looks like in a majority minority country where, you know, you have a massive wildfire and they don't give a warning and they don't use water because they're guided by these idiotic principles and these absolute morons in control. And that's going to mean a matter of life and death for ordinary Americans. But instead of that, they instead have Oprah Winfrey order the space lasers to destroy all the MAGA voters in Maui, which there are probably hardly any conservatives there, just for a real estate deal. It's like they didn't need to do this. It's just so ridiculous, and it's always based on like left wing priors for this. It's like the evil elites are doing this just for a real estate deal. It's like Captain Planet. It's like Captain Planet as a kid, if you guys remember, it was like a cartoon show, very leftist, as an environmentalist hero. And now people like on the right are using Captain Planet like themes of like what the villains would do, and only Captain Planet could save them. But now the right is dealing with this because they're totally addicted to conspiracy theories and they're unwilling to face reality. I think it may be in some ways a reason why the right is so addicted to conspiracy theories is because they feel reality is too dark and grim, and it's a lot more comfortable to believe that there's somebody in control and that they can entertain themselves with this latest conspiracy theory they have, and like space lasers and everything. But it's ultimately stupid, and it's ultimately deceitful and dishonest. It's like it's better to be honest and upfront about what we're facing rather than to believe in the Oprah Winfrey global cabal of space laser owners. But that response to the Maui wildfire is like one of the downsides of this insane clown party. Instead of like, I would be totally down for the insane clown party or open to it if it was like focused on the identity issues. If they were doing rap songs about affirmative action or rap songs about how the Maui wildfire shows all these why we shouldn't allow racial equity to guide public policy. You know, I'd be totally down for it, but that's not what it is. It's really just an addiction to conspiracy theories and even like kind of a warmed over semi-Marxism that we're seeing with like blacks and whites uniting together around the Richmond and north of Richmond to do something. We're not sure what's uniting them, but we're really excited about inner city blacks and hillbillies uniting together. And it's like, this is all just complete stupidity and not what we're about. And we're unfortunately going to witness a lot of stupidity, but it's a fact of just keeping your head on your shoulders and trying to reach the best people possible and sticking with your message and not succumbing to the incentives and the money around the appealing to the insane clown party, and not just like going totally, full on idiot. And I think with a lot of conservatives is that it's up to conservative influence or right-wing influencers to do this, because there's so many incentives for right-wing influencers to just follow what the conservative consumer demographic wants rather than what they need to hear and what's the truth. And so a lot of people lie to them. They see what's trending on social media. They see that they're getting into conspiracy theories and stuff, and they'll totally entertain them. It was like the most idiotic example is Damar Hamlin, getting replaced by a clone. Remarkably, his body double is also very good at football. It's remarkable they found someone who looked exactly like him, who is also a pro-worthy safety. But the elites are getting really good at this. But that's what's happening. You have to be sensible. You can't let yourself be dragged down to these levels. And the wildfire thing is very popular, because I talk to people I talked to a lot of guys who are talking to their parents, and their parents are like normal conservatives. And they were totally believing in the wildfire stuff. And then the parents were getting mad that their son was not being open minded enough to believe in the space lasers theory. So it's better, as I always say, it's better to the identity issues are right before us. We don't have to invent a conspiracy theory about it. You have the facts and the data right before us. It's whether it's like who's committing crime, what happens to a city when whites totally leave and the control falls to these corrupt BIPOC. What happens there? This is all in front of us. You just have to put the data together. But a lot of people would rather invent a conspiracy theory because it makes them more money and entertains people more than the stark reality of life in America. And so that's the real problem I have with the development of the Insane Clown Party. And it's like not directed either. It's not, there's like no leader of it. And depending on what happens in 2024, like Trump could, I think he'll still be a symbol and icon and people will still revere him, but he won't be leading it anymore after 2044. He could be leading it if he's president. So a lot of these problems could be, contained over time. But let's say if he's not, maybe he's convicted or he's, off the public stage, it becomes this like leaderless, I don't want to say a resistance movement, but leaderless political movement where they're just following any like type of grifter or carnival barker who tells them like the latest conspiracy theory and they get worked up about it. And they do have the ability to impact the market, as I talked about last week in last week's podcast and my article last week. They can punish companies and they can reward companies, but when it comes to actual affecting political power and political change, they don't have the ability to do that because they're too ridiculous and too that they alienate too many people, and they're not. It becomes just something, a way of venting over political impotence that they just like lash out in any all directions and invent stuff to further along that mindset. Brings me back to a point that I believe I've said in podcasts before, but QAnon has had far more influence on the American right than the alt-right. The alt-right has gotten a lot of its issues to play, anti-white racism and great replacement, but it's overshadowed by what QAnon cared about and the QAnon worldview of what's going on. And also a lot of the mainstream right tries to appeal to that. I mean, Daily Wire does it, The Blaze does it. They all try to appeal to it. They don't try to go full QAnon and full crazy. They try to moderate and make sure that it is going to alienate advertisers, but it's still directed in that way, in that fashion. And it's why the right now loves conspiracy theories, loves these global cabal things of what like ever QAnon was. And QAnon was like funny content, but at the end of the day, it's like, I don't think people should legitimately believe it. But it's unfortunately, and it's also had a very much of wigger, like very low class, horrible aesthetic quality to it that is deeply unappealing to, I think, like, any middle class person who's read a book before. But it captured people's minds and imaginations for the right, and it's now you're seeing the QAnonification of the larger American right happen before our eyes, and you can see it in the response to the wildfires. You can see it in the love for these rap songs that indulge in like random conspiracy theories and other things, and that's really something that could happen. And I think if the QAnonification of the right is like not a good thing, it will create a lot of funny content, but I don't think our main goal is funny content. It is to change the world in a positive direction and make the country and the world reflect our views, not to laugh at the latest mole children theory and what Real Raw News is promoting. I mean, it is funny, but it is like really dark at the idea of the people who believe Real Raw News, because I've seen the accounts that believe it. And it really, I laugh at Real Raw News all the time, but then I read the accounts of the people who believe it, and it's extremely dark in what they believe and stuff. And it's like, maybe this isn't a good thing. So that's just something to keep in mind. I assume the chat and listeners will all love these topics and will totally agree with me. And so I look forward to seeing all your great commentary about what I said in this podcast. Now on for the kind of lead questions. Today we just have one, which is fine. I probably need to remind people to send in more questions. If you did have a question and somehow I didn't see it or didn't get in my inbox, make sure to send me a reply and I will look for it for next week. So my apologies on that, but I looked thoroughly. It appears we just have one this week. Usually we've been having a lot of questions, so we'll send a reminder to make sure that anyone can ask as many questions as possible. There wasn't as much news except for the Georgia stuff and the wildfires last week, so that probably is it. But as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions and suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Kind of Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.substack.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. This question comes from Jay. Jay asks, Scott, do you agree with Ron Unz's assessment of the elite composition in America today? I might paraphrase his views as Jews are still disproportionately overrepresented, but their competency has gone down drastically in the last generation or two. Regardless of ethnic background, do you think the competency of American elites has declined in the last generation or two? To go with it, I mean, there still are obviously disproportionately represented to their basis in American population. I mean, they're only 2 or 3%, at most 3% of the American population. Yet they're at least 15 or 20% of people in like elite universities and stuff. So they're definitely overrepresented, but they're also declining in number in the younger generations. It's their overall quality, and also there's out marriage rates are very high, and also a lot of the younger the Jews don't view themselves in the same way that their parents and grandparents did. It's also why there's like declining support for Israel among the younger generations, and there's not as strong of an ethnic identity as there once was, as there is the case for a lot of Americans throughout. And also there's Asians and others are trying to elbow their way in there. There's also these kind of mandatory racial quotas that they're having to have in there. And probably the two groups that are muscling their way into the elite are white Gentile women and Asians. And a lot of the type of war over wokeness at the elite level that you were seeing, like there was this pushback from the left over wokeness and cancel culture around 2020 and 2019. And it was generally a lot of the people who were opposing it, and also opposition to Me Too and other things, were older Jews, as a lot of them were boomers in their 60s, the Gen Xers, and it was really against a war against some of the Asians, mostly South Asians, and a lot of the white Gentile women who seemed to be leading the woke, the further advancement of wokeness. So it was a battle on the left for that, and I think that's something that's taking place in the elite, is that there's the elite composition itself is changing. And in the competency level, absolutely, because I think that now, there's much more of a greater demand for these racial quotas, as we're seeing in like Hawaii and elsewhere, and seeing in California, and that these people are not as qualified enough to keep the lights running or keep the trains running. And it's not just like, at the very elite level. It is at a level of like the middle level of the people who are running like the water plants and running, the power plants and keeping these things running that are essential to American life. And you don't quite have that level of confidence that you have before, because a lot of the white boomers are gone. These guys, these white boomer nerds who were there, who are just about their job, are being replaced by people who are there to satisfy our diversity requirement. And that does create a level of incompetence on that level. But you can even see it on foreign policy too, is that American foreign policy is becoming a lot more erratic. And any time that I say, at the same time that American empire is still very strong, it's not on the verge of collapse, and it's has even greater dominance over Europe, but there are problems arising, and it's due to a lot of these stupid people who are much more fervently committed to leftism and wokeism than their elders, who are now running foreign policy. And you can see this an example in Brazil, where America was fully anti-Bolsonaro and fully pro-Lula, and we told Brazilians that they could not try to launch a coup against Lula, and that we would firmly oppose it because we're on Team Lula. And Lula has repaid that support by being totally anti-America on the world stage, of trying to bring in China, developing closer ties with China, developing closer ties with Russia, being very anti-American, the interests of American corporations in his country. And it's definitely not to America's benefit that we now have Lula rather than Bolsonaro there, because Bolsonaro was very pro-America and was more willing to go along with America on a lot of subjects. But now, due to the fact that we care more about sticking it to people who are like Trump rather than developing our allies, or rather than developing people who would serve the interests of the globalist American empire, they're just not doing that. They're just following they're so traumatized by Trump and so committed to these wokeist ideas that they want international wokeism and it doesn't matter whether the people that they're supporting are anti-America or not. What really matters is that they're resisting Trumpism. And you can even see this with like Meloni in Italy, is that even though she's doing everything possible to support America, Biden and those people would not lift a finger to if there was some attempt to remove her, because at the end of the day, they see her as a right-wing racist, and they don't care about how fervently she supports the Ukraine war and how she's getting Italy off the China's Belt and Road Initiative. They don't care. At the end of the day, she's like, and they don't even care that she's not even fulfilling her immigration promises. They still see her as a right-wing extremist, and they'd rather have people who are inviting China and Russia into Italy as long as they're firmly anti-racist. And so this is like an idiotic way to run foreign policy, and it's also coming at the impact of our insistence that every country on earth legalize homosexuality and promote trans rights is coming at the expense of all these third world countries that have more social conservative values, really don't want to do this, and now they favor China and Russia over us because China and Russia don't demand that they teach kindergartners gender pronouns. So there is becoming a lack of competency on that level and maintaining basic structures we need to have the high level of American life, and that's going to continue to decline over time. And that's not to praise the old elite. It's just to say that the people at top are getting dumber, and it's getting more diverse. And you just have to see that from the levels of what's happening in our country. It's not going to come to full collapse, but I think you're just going to have more incompetence and more ridiculous catastrophes as we're seeing in Maui and elsewhere. Is that there's 30 years ago there had been a strong response to it, there had been an accurate emergency response, you would not seen the levels of deaths and destruction that you have today. But now we're guided by more ridiculous left-wing ideals, and they're having these racial quotas to put in incompetent people in there. And that's really, and what they care more about is about fulfilling this racial vision of America rather than fulfilling a competent vision of America. So that's my take on that, and that's the one and only question we got today. So that is it for Highly Respected. We're going to have more great content later on this week. We'll have an article, should be posted later this week as well, and another incredible IQ supplement along with all that. So be on the lookout for all that great content. So until next time, stay respected.